A warning to our viewers. This true crime documentary contains real footage and detailed accounts involving child abduction, sexual abuse, and murder. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Merced, California, 1972. As Don McLean's American Pie played on car radios and families gathered around their television sets to watch All in the Family, life in this farming community moved to its own quiet rhythm. Nixon had just visited China. The last American troops were returning from Vietnam, and California's Central Valley was experiencing an agricultural boom that seemed to promise endless prosperity. Here, in the shadow of Yosemite National Park, where almond trees bloomed in spring and peach orchards grew heavy with summer fruit, Merced was transforming. The newly opened Merced Mall brought big city shopping to small-town life, while Castle Air Force Base buzzed with Cold War activity. Yet, beneath this veneer of progress and small-town innocence, where children still rode their bikes until dusk and screen doors slammed with the sound of summer, where everyone knew not just their neighbors' names but their stories, something darker was brewing. Among these families were the Stayners, Kay and Delbert, raising their 5 children in a modest home on a quiet street. They couldn't have known that their ordinary American life was about to become a story that would haunt California for decades to come. December 4, 1972. A white Buick pulls up beside a 7-year-old boy walking home from school. Inside sits a man who will steal 7 years of his life. But in a twist that would shock the nation, this boy's heroic escape would later stand in stark contrast to his own brother's descent into darkness, becoming one of California's most notorious killers. 2 brothers, 2 destinies, 1 family, forever marked by both extraordinary courage and unspeakable evil. From the outside, they seemed to embody the American dream: hardworking parents, 3 daughters, and 2 sons, Cary and Steven. Family photos show them smiling at backyard barbecues, opening Christmas presents, celebrating birthdays, moments frozen in time before everything changed. But beneath this veneer of small-town tranquility, forces were already in motion that would transform this ordinary family into the center of 2 of California's most extraordinary and tragic stories. One brother would become a hero, his courage touching the hearts of millions. The other would descend into darkness, leaving a trail of horror that would haunt Yosemite for generations. This is the story of Steven and Cary Stayner, 2 brothers bound by blood yet destined for paths so divergent, so impossible that if you read them in a novel you'd dismiss them as fiction. But sometimes truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's more terrifying. And in Merced, California, that truth was about to unfold in ways that would challenge everything we think we know about family, trauma, heroism, and evil. The Stayner home buzzed with the controlled chaos of 5 children. Cary, the eldest son, was born in August 1961, followed by his brother Steven in April 1965. Friends remember them as opposites from the start: Steven outgoing and adventurous, Cary quiet and withdrawn. Even at age 3, Cary showed signs of internal struggle. Doctors diagnosed him with trichotillomania, a compulsive disorder that caused him to pull out his hair. The resulting bald spots led to merciless teasing at school, forcing him to perpetually wear a baseball cap, a shield against the world's cruel stares. Despite this, his intelligence shone through. Teachers placed him in accelerated classes, and his artistic talents earned him recognition as most creative in his high school yearbook. Steven, by contrast, seemed to embody the carefree spirit of childhood. He was the kind of boy who could make friends with anyone, who lived in a world of endless possibilities. Their childhood friend, Jack Bungart, remembers how Cary, despite his own struggles, looked out for his younger brother. He loved Steven, hung out with him, played with him. No one could have predicted how profoundly their paths would diverge. Behind closed doors, the family dynamics were complex. Delbert Stayner worked as a mechanic. Kay stayed home with the children. They weren't wealthy, but they got by. Friends described them as strict but loving parents. Yet there were undercurrents, unspoken tensions that would only be understood years later. Cary's childhood drawings, preserved in family albums, hint at a troubled mind. While other children drew sunny skies and happy faces, his artwork showed a preoccupation with darker themes. Yet in the context of a busy household with 5 children, these warning signs were easy to miss. After all, what parent wants to believe their child might be different? What parent can see the darkness growing in their own home? By 1972, the year everything changed, 11-year-old Cary had already begun to retreat into himself, while 7-year-old Steven remained the bright light of the family, the normal one, the easy child. But normalcy, like happiness, can be fragile. And in the Stayner household, both were about to be shattered in ways no one could have imagined. December 4, 1972. A sleety winter afternoon in Merced. The kind of day when mothers tell their children to zip up their coats, when breath forms clouds in the cold air, when 7-year-old boys dream of Christmas just weeks away. For Steven Stayner, walking home alone from school along Highway 140, it was a day like any other. Until it wasn't. Miles away, at the Yosemite Lodge, 2 men had already set their plan in motion. Kenneth Parnell, a night security guard with a hidden past, and his co-worker, Irvin Murphy, a man described by those who knew him as trusting and simple-minded. Parnell had convinced Murphy they were on a mission from God to take in a boy and raise him in a religious household. The truth was far more sinister. As Steven walked home, Murphy approached him with religious pamphlets, asking if his mother might be interested in donating to their church. It was a carefully crafted ruse designed to prey on a child's innocence. Moments later, a white Buick appeared, driven by Parnell. Steven, still believing he was helping with church donations, climbed into the car. What no one knew then was that Parnell's cabin sat just hundreds of feet from Steven's grandfather's home. So close to family, yet soon to be so far. When Steven didn't return home that afternoon, the Stayner family's world imploded. Kay and Delbert sounded the alarm. The Merced Police Department mounted their largest search effort to date. Officers combed the streets, volunteers searched the almond groves, missing posters appeared in every shop window, but Steven had vanished without a trace. Back at the Stayner home, 11-year-old Cary retreated into himself even further. Friends would later recall seeing him in the backyard at night, wishing on stars for his brother's return. Every night, childhood friend Mike Marchese remembered, Cary would look up at the sky and pray for Steven to come home. That first night of Steven's disappearance, Parnell had already begun his manipulation, telling the terrified 7-year-old a lie that would haunt him for years. Your parents can't afford you anymore. They don't want you. But I'll take care of you now. In that moment, 2 lives were forever altered. The stolen child and the brother left behind. As the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the searching gradually slowed. But in the Stayner household, time seemed to stand still. Cary would later tell investigators that he felt like a ghost in his own home, watching his parents pour their energy into finding Steven while he faded into the background. No one yet understood that this trauma would plant the seeds for an even darker future, one that would eventually shake Yosemite to its core. For 7 years, Steven Stayner lived as Dennis Gregory Parnell. His kidnapper kept his real middle name and birth date, small threads connecting him to his true identity. Parnell moved them frequently across California, from Santa Rosa to Comanche, always staying just ahead of discovery. At each new school, each new town, Steven became more deeply embedded in his forced identity as Dennis Parnell. By day, Parnell posed as a caring father. He enrolled Steven in school, bought him clothes, even gave him a Manchester Terrier puppy named Queenie. But behind closed doors, the reality was horrific. The abuse began the very first night and would continue for years. In a cruel twist of fate, Parnell's cabin in Cathy's Valley had been just hundreds of feet from Steven's grandfather's home, so close to salvation, yet impossibly far. Back in Merced, the Stayner family was splintering under the weight of absence. Kay and Delbert continued their desperate search, following every lead no matter how small. Each Christmas, they still hung Steven's stocking. Each birthday, they still bought presents. Hope became both lifeline and torment. For Cary, watching his parents' relentless focus on finding Steven created a shadow he couldn't escape. School friends noticed changes. The quiet, artistic boy became even more withdrawn. His trichotillomania worsened, the compulsive hair-pulling now a physical manifestation of internal turmoil. In his high school art classes, his drawings grew increasingly dark, though few recognized these as warning signs at the time. As Dennis, Steven was given unusual freedoms for a child his age. Parnell allowed him to drink, to stay out late, to come and go as he pleased. It was a calculated strategy, making Steven dependent while systematically erasing his past. Yet somehow, deep inside, Steven held on to a crucial piece of himself. "I know my first name is Steven," he would later tell police, a declaration of identity that became both testimony and triumph. In 1975, Barbara Mathias entered the picture, moving in with Parnell and Dennis. For 18 months, she became complicit in the abuse of a 9-year-old boy. Yet when interviewed years later, she would claim complete ignorance of his true identity, another adult who chose not to see what was in front of them. The years rolled by. Steven grew from a child into a teenager. In Merced, Cary graduated high school, voted most creative in his class, a bitter achievement in a family still haunted by absence. The contrast between the brothers' lives grew starker, one forced to grow up too fast, the other retreating from growing up at all. By 1979, Steven was 14, the same age Cary had been when his brother disappeared. No one could have predicted that the next chapter would transform both brothers' lives forever, setting them on paths that would lead one to heroism and the other toward an unimaginable darkness. February 1980. Kenneth Parnell had grown tired of his aging captive. Steven, now 14, was no longer the child he'd stolen 7 years earlier, and so Parnell set his sights on a new victim, 5-year-old Timothy White, a kindergartner from Ukiah, California. Using a local teenager as his accomplice, Parnell succeeded in abducting the boy, bringing him home to where Steven waited. For 2 weeks, Steven watched Timothy suffer the separation from his family. He saw in the kindergartner's tears his own lost childhood, heard in the boy's nighttime sobs echoes of his own past terror. Steven's high school girlfriend would later recall his words, "I was not going to let that child go through what I had already been through, and if I didn't take care of it now, it would just get worse." On March 1, 1980, Steven made his move. Waiting until Parnell left for his night security shift, he took Timothy's hand and stepped into the darkness. They had no money, no transportation, and no guarantee of success. But they had something more powerful: desperation. The two boys hitchhiked through the night toward Ukiah. Timothy couldn't remember exactly where he lived, so Steven made a crucial decision. He would take them to the police station. It was a decision that would save not only Timothy's life, but his own. When they arrived at the police station, Steven spoke the words that would become legendary in American criminal history. "I know my first name is Steven." This simple declaration, spoken in the quiet of the Ukiah police station, would become the title of books and movies, a testament to the power of identity and the strength of one boy's spirit. The news spread like wildfire. After 7 years, Steven Stayner was alive. In Merced, Kay and Delbert Stayner received the phone call they had dreamed of for 2,555 days. Their son was coming home. Television cameras captured the moment Steven walked through the door of his childhood home. The footage shows a teenage boy, tall and lean, moving uncertainly toward parents who had last held a 7-year-old. Behind him, partially hidden by the crowd, stood his brother Cary, wearing his ever-present baseball cap, his expression unreadable. Steven Stayner had done the impossible. Not only had he escaped his own captivity, but he had refused to let another child suffer the same fate. In saving Timothy White, he had also saved himself. But freedom, as the Stayner family would soon learn, came with its own challenges. And for Cary, watching his brother return as a national hero would stir emotions that would later manifest in ways no one could have predicted. Steven Stayner's return made headlines across America. Within days, he was sitting across from David Hartman on Good Morning America, his story captivating millions. The boy who saved himself and another child became an instant hero. His face splashed across newspapers and television screens nationwide. But beneath the media frenzy, a family was struggling to rebuild. "I returned almost a grown man," Steven told Newsweek, "and yet my parents saw me at first as their 7-year-old. The reality of reunion proved far more complex than the heartwarming headlines suggested. Steven had lived for years without rules, allowed to drink, smoke, and roam freely. Now, back in his childhood home, he faced structure, expectations, and the ghosts of his stolen youth. For Cary, his brother's return brought its own torments. Where once he had wished upon stars for Steven's return, now he watched from the shadows as his younger brother received the attention he had craved during those 7 lonely years. At press conferences, photographs show Cary standing in the background, wearing his signature baseball cap, his face a mask of complex emotions. The media circus intensified when NBC announced plans for a television movie. "I Know My First Name is Steven" would bring the Stayner story to living rooms across America. Steven himself served as an advisor to the production, even appearing in a small role as a police officer. But while cameras rolled, the real Steven was fighting private battles. School proved difficult. Bullies targeted him, using his past trauma as ammunition. He eventually dropped out. Despite the challenges, Steven fought to build a normal life. He married Jody Edmondson in 1985, became a father to 2 children, and worked with child abduction groups, speaking to children about personal safety. He refused to let his past define his future. In a cruel twist of fate, it wouldn't be his past that claimed him, but a motorcycle accident on his way home from work. September 16, 1989. A car turned in front of Steven's motorcycle on a Merced street. The hit-and-run accident took the life of the 24-year-old hero who had survived so much worse. 500 people attended his funeral. Among them was 14-year-old Timothy White, serving as a pallbearer for the man who had saved his life 9 years earlier. At Steven's funeral, Cary stood apart from the crowd, wrestling with demons only he could see. His brother's death marked not just the end of Steven's story, but the beginning of a darker chapter in the Stayner family saga. The spotlight that had followed Steven would soon turn to Cary, revealing horrors that would once again thrust the family into national headlines, this time for very different reasons. In the years following Steven's death, something began to shift in Cary Stayner. The quiet, artistic boy who once drew cartoons for his high school newspaper was disappearing, replaced by a man growing increasingly detached from reality. Friends noticed changes. His isolation deepened, his behavior became more erratic. But no one could have predicted the darkness taking root. By the mid-1990s, Cary's mental state had deteriorated significantly. He confided in a friend about violent fantasies, about driving a truck through his workplace, killing everyone inside, then setting the building ablaze. In 1991, he attempted suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. 4 years later, he was admitted to a mental institution following what he described as a nervous breakdown. Perhaps seeking escape from his demons, Cary found refuge in the majestic landscape of Yosemite National Park. The same wilderness that had once been his childhood playground now became his sanctuary. In 1997, he secured a job as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge, just 7 miles from the park's entrance. To visitors, he was simply the quiet maintenance man who kept to himself. But beneath this mundane exterior, violent fantasies continued to grow. Cary would later reveal to investigators that these thoughts had plagued him since childhood, beginning around age 7, notably the same age Steven was when he was kidnapped. He found temporary peace only in isolation, often retreating to remote areas of the park where he would smoke marijuana and sunbathe naked, seeking escape from the voices in his head. December 1990 brought another tragedy to the Stayner family. Cary's uncle, Jesse "Jerry" Stayner was found shot to death in his Merced home, killed with his own shotgun. The murder remained unsolved, but years later, investigators would look at this case with new eyes. Cary, who had been living with his uncle at the time, would later claim that Jerry had molested him during the period of Steven's kidnapping. As 1999 approached, Cary Stayner had become a powder keg of suppressed trauma and violent impulses. His job at Cedar Lodge gave him access to a steady stream of tourists, visitors who saw only the beautiful facade of Yosemite, unaware of the predator in their midst. The park's serene landscape was about to become the backdrop for a series of crimes that would shock the nation and forever change how people viewed this American paradise. February 1999. Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter Julie, and 16-year-old Argentine exchange student Silvina Peloso checked into room 509 at Cedar Lodge. They were just three of countless tourists who had come to experience the majesty of Yosemite. They couldn't have known that their handyman, Cary Stayner, had been watching, waiting, planning. When the three failed to arrive in San Francisco as scheduled, the alarm was raised. For weeks, investigators combed the mountains, following leads that led nowhere. Then, on March 18th, a grim discovery. Carol Sund's charred rental car was found in a remote area containing two bodies burned beyond recognition. Days later, a hand-drawn map arrived at the FBI office, leading them to Julie Sund's remains. The FBI interviewed everyone at Cedar Lodge, including Stayner. He remained calm, cooperative, showing no signs of involvement. Investigators, focused on other suspects, moved on. It would prove to be a fatal oversight. 5 months passed. The community began to breathe easier, believing the killer had been caught. Then, on July 21st, 26-year-old Joey Armstrong, a naturalist who taught children about Yosemite's wonders, was found dead near her cabin. This time, Stayner had left evidence. His distinctive International Scout had been seen near Armstrong's home. FBI agents tracked Stayner to a nudist resort where he'd fled after Armstrong's murder. During questioning, he did something that stunned even veteran investigators. He confessed not only to Armstrong's murder, but to the killings of Carol and Julie Sund and Silvina Peloso. His first words to the agents were chilling. "I want to make a deal. I want a movie of the week made about my story." The parallels were impossible to ignore. Just as his brother Steven had become famous through a TV movie about his heroism, Cary sought notoriety through his crimes. When asked about his motives, he spoke of long-standing fantasies of violence, dating back to his childhood, to the very time his brother was taken. The capture of Cary Stayner brought closure to the families of his victims, but it also forced America to confront an uncomfortable truth. How could two brothers, shaped by the same childhood trauma, take such drastically different paths? While Steven had channeled his pain into saving another child, Cary's trauma had twisted into something monstrous, leaving a trail of devastation that would forever change Yosemite's peaceful image. In 2002, Cary Stayner stood before a jury in San Jose. His lawyers argued for an insanity defense, pointing to a family history of mental illness and sexual abuse. But the evidence was overwhelming. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, death. Today he remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison, where he continues to cast a long shadow over his family's legacy. The city of Merced bears the scars of both brothers' stories. When residents proposed naming a park after Steven to honor his heroism, city officials hesitated, worried the name Stayner Park would evoke memories not of Steven's courage, but of Cary's crimes. Yet in nearby Ukiah, Timothy White's hometown, they found another way to remember. A statue stands in Applegate Park, showing teenage Steven leading young Timothy to safety, a bronze testament to the triumph of humanity over horror. The Stayner saga changed how we think about trauma's ripple effects through families and communities. While Steven's story led to changes in California law, allowing consecutive prison terms in child abduction cases, Cary's crimes forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about the intersection of trauma and evil. For Kay and Delbert Stayner, the tragedy never ended. They lost one son twice, first to kidnapping, then to a cruel twist of fate. Their other son lives behind bars, his crimes immortalized in the same media spotlight that once celebrated his brother's heroism. Steven Stayner passed away in 2013 in Winton, California, carrying these burdens to his grave. Today, child safety advocates still reference the Stayner cases when discussing both the resilience of survivors and the complex nature of trauma. Steven's story reminds us that victims can become heroes, while Cary's serves as a dark warning about trauma's unpredictable impact on the human psyche. The tale of the Stayner brothers forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the same family tree can bear both the sweetest fruit and the most bitter. Steven Stayner died a hero, having saved not only himself but another child from a fate he knew all too well. His brother Cary lives as a cautionary tale about the darkness that can grow in trauma's shadow. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest monsters and the greatest heroes can come from the very same place, leaving us to wonder about the fine line between salvation and damnation, and the choices that lead us toward one or the other. Two brothers, one family, two paths that would diverge so dramatically they seem almost impossible to reconcile. The story of Steven and Cary Stayner continues to haunt the American consciousness, challenging our understanding of human nature itself. Steven Stayner could have remained silent that night in 1980. He could have left 5-year-old Timothy White to suffer the same fate he had endured for 7 years. Instead, he chose to act, to save not only himself but another innocent child. In doing so, he transformed from victim to hero, showing us that even in our darkest moments, we retain the power to choose light over darkness. Yet in the same family, shaped by the same trauma, his brother Cary chose a path of unimaginable darkness. The contrast between the brothers stands as a stark reminder that trauma's impact on the human psyche remains one of life's most unpredictable forces. While one brother's pain led to an act of profound courage, the other's festered into something monstrous. Today, the Stayner brothers' story resonates far beyond the shadows of Yosemite or the streets of Merced. It speaks to fundamental questions about human nature, about good and evil, about choice and circumstance, about the power of trauma to both destroy and redeem. In the end, perhaps the most profound lesson of the Stayner saga is this: that within each of us lies the capacity for both darkness and light, for destruction and salvation. Steven Stayner chose to become the hero he needed when he was 7 years old. His legacy lives on, in every child saved from abuse, in every survivor who finds the courage to speak out, in every act of courage that transforms victim into hero. The shadow of his brother's crimes reminds us that evil often walks among us, wearing an ordinary face. But it is Steven's light, his final, defining choice to save another child, that continues to shine brightest in the darkness, offering hope that even in our most wounded moments, we retain the power to choose who we become. For the families of Carol and Julie's son, Silvina Peloso, and Juai Armstrong, no ending can truly bring peace. For the Stayner family, no explanation can fully reconcile the divergent paths of their sons. But in telling their story, we honor both the triumph of human courage and the necessity of remaining vigilant against the darkness that can grow in trauma's shadow. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.